So this work is beyond space and time. Mm. So it's very much about, what Uncle John may have done or Uncle Joe may have done in 3 generations ago. Because if what was done then, so anything which is considered societally inappropriate at the time, and of course, historically, everything was societally inappropriate. Now nothing is societally inappropriate, but anything that was considered societally inappropriate is not spoken about. Mm-hmm. It's concealed. It becomes a family secret, and family secrets ooze toxicity down the lines.
Welcome to the world of energy, where science meets spirit. Ancient wisdom merges with cutting-edge knowledge, and the possibilities for a healthier, happier you are endless. Hi everybody, Lauren here with a new episode of Cool People, Big Ideas. And what a joy I had with this interview. I got to sit down with the one and only Jill Purce. She is a lioness in her field of chanting and working with families, internal family systems, and in a very provocative and unique way. And we had a wide-ranging conversation. It was just magical and powerful. And when I went back to listen to it again, I was amazed at how incredible it was. And I'm really excited for you to tune in and listen. We got to film this while we were both on vacation, so it's got a bit of a laid-back vibe, and we got really personal, which was super fun. I think you're going to enjoy it. Sit back, relax, and take it all in. Hi, Jill Purce. Thank you so much for taking time out of your vacation time on both of our favorite places in the world. So thanks for taking time out to be with me.
You're welcome. Pleasure.
It is a pleasure to get to be live with you again. I've definitely watched things with you and been online with you, but there's nothing like being there live. And I want to just kind of dive right in. I was just at a workshop that you were attending or being part of the leadership team of with your whole family. And one of the things that everyone was sharing, all 4 of you, was how joyful it was and is to be able to teach together. So I just wonder if that was something that you had always wanted to do or dreamed of, or it just kind of naturally happened. How has that been for you? Because you teach alone some work and then you join and teach with the 3 men in your family. Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, it was really unusual. We never do. I mean, we're never in the same place at the same time usually. And it was just wonderful to me to see how the boys had blossomed and how articulate they'd become and how their ideas went all over and joined up all the dots. And so it was absolutely thrilling. And to see also how Merlin has kind of run with what Rupert does in Cosmo in a way. And also what I've done, and Cosmo has run more with what I've done, and I was known as the Matriarch, and so people love families. I mean, I think particularly in North America, people really love. I often have messages from people, saying that they're family fans and they found me through Merlin's work or Rupert's work or whatever, but they didn't because I have a different name, so they didn't know I'm the same family.
Right. And so you said the word matriarch and you had a tinge to that word. I want to hear more of that because the work that you do separately from the men is working with families and archetypal families and all of that. And so you use that word kind of with a little laugh, but you are the matriarch of this family, and archetypally you carry that as you teach. And I imagine I'm going to take your workshop and we're going to talk about that because I'm actually afraid to. So I want to talk about why I'm afraid to, what is coming up there. But what does that word matriarch mean to you? And why did you kind of...
Well, I don't know why I did that little tweak. It was just the word that came up in the group. I suppose I've never really thought of myself as a matriarch. I never thought, because I don't normally teach as part of the family, and this was only because we are all here together, and I've never done the boys' workshop, and I wanted to do it. I've talked in it before for them, and I've given the evening session for them, but I've never actually really participated and seen what they had to offer. So I didn't really come up with a term, but I'm happy with it. But I can't say that I take responsibility for it. Although, of course, I do, and I am, and there's no getting away from that.
Yeah.
There's no getting away from it.
No.
But it is lovely. It is great to be a family, and of course, as you know, part of my work is working with families and seeing. So what I do with the family constellations is it's all about restructuring and bringing order back, bringing back the outliers, all the forgotten people, all the things that have been forgotten or buried, or people have cut off from because they think, somebody's abused them, and so if they cut off all connection with them, that'll be cool and they won't be affected by it. But actually, the reverse is true, because anybody who's an outlier, who's been cast out, is part of the whole nature of humanity wanting to belong. There is nothing more important to a human being than to belong. And if somebody's done something horrible, usually they're quite a powerful person. And if you outlaw or cast out a powerful person, they're going to make trouble because they want to belong and they want to come back. And so the work is very much about bringing back the outliers, honoring the perpetrators. And when I say that, people freak out and think, how can you honor are you honoring them rather than what they do? It's not, I don't distinguish really. There's no blame in the work, which is what's so interesting. It's about what's happened, dealing with what's happened, and honoring the perpetrator, not forgiving. Sometimes people will use the word forgive. And this is problematic, because if you forgive somebody, you're elevating yourself above them. I am so grand, I can forgive you, poor little worm down there. In order to forgive somebody, you have to elevate yourself above them. You have to feel a little bit superior. And therefore the person becomes a little bit inferior. Then that's, cool. But it doesn't work. And so if you honor that person, and people often ask me what that means, but you elevate them above yourself. You're putting yourself down and you're honoring them. And if they've abused you, it's hard to do that, but it's really powerful.
So you're saying that is what you want to be doing, versus forgiveness, you elevating above them, honoring, you're elevating them above you,
Exactly.
Even if they've hurt you quite significantly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you talk more about what that does to you, the person that's what is happening for you to, first of all, be able to do that? Because in my work, it's very much, we use that word forgiveness and self-forgiveness as well, because a lot of people blame themselves for things that have happened. So I'd be so curious, how would I pivot that? And what is it then that is happening to make you feel free?
Well, if you outlaw somebody, if somebody's abused you and you blame them and you cast them out, you blame yourself. Mm-hmm. And then you feel guilty, and then you punish yourself. If you honor them, firstly, it's really hard to do it. And the difficulty involved is part of the magic of the healing. In order to honor somebody who's done you wrong, that takes a lot of guts. And it's in that process that the healing happens. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, when I'm doing this face-to-face, somebody can stand there for quite a long period, unable to speak. And sometimes in the end, I'll just say the words. And then when they say the words, even if they can't believe them themselves, something follows. And then something is healed. And it's really important. Mm-hmm. Because it's all about bringing everybody back. So, rather than pushing everybody out beyond the pale, it's all about bringing order into the system. So everybody who's out there, everybody who's done somebody wrong or been forgotten or whatever has exiled or excluded somebody, means that somebody, even in the past, it means that somebody in the current family has to resonate with that person and is entangled with that person. And so since it's all about bringing everybody back, it's about restoring the integrity and the authenticity and the coherence of the field. And for that to happen, everybody has to be brought back. Everybody has to be remembered. And the word remembering is so interesting, because it means to gather together the dismembered parts. And recollection is to recollect that which has been dispersed. So these ideas of memory are bringing back the past. And the whole work is about restoring order within the field. It's all about the field, restoring order so everybody's in their rightful place.
What are you talking about? This is in the past that like Uncle Joe 3 generations ago did something that has been reverberating through the fields, and or what if like cousin Jill, I didn't mean to pull that out,
That's okay.
right, is very disruptive in the family now. Somebody is like all the ways you can be disruptive, alcoholic, violent, you can't bring them to family gatherings because all of this. In the now, so you're not talking about like, come on everybody, let's have Thanksgiving dinner together now. Are you talking about going back and working with whatever Uncle Joe did 3 generations ago?
Both. It's about bringing back the field. And so this work is beyond space and time. Mm-hmm. So it's very much about, what Uncle John may have done or Uncle Joe may have done in 3 generations ago. Because if what was done then, so anything which is considered societally inappropriate at the time, and of course, historically, everything was societally inappropriate. Now, nothing is societally inappropriate, but anything that was considered societally inappropriate is not spoken about. Mm-hmm. It's concealed. It becomes a family secret, and family secrets ooze toxicity down the lines and infect everybody except the living. So the work is about the living, which is the cutting edge of life, working with anything that's happened anywhere in the field historically. So you understand the family through time and through space, through the eyes of multiple members of the family and through all the generations. And so anybody that's done anything historically peculiar, the trauma, anything traumatic, anything considered societally inappropriate, abortions, addictions, emigrations, accidents, maiming, mentally ill, physically ill, dodgy dealing, alcohol, etc. Any of those things cause a trauma, illegitimacy, of course, causes a trauma to be held in the field, and that's very conservative and goes down through the generations. Suicides happen in families. If somebody commits suicide, then there's a kind of pull. So when you have major, for example, there was a place near my husband's town where 7,000 people were killed in the battlefield in the 15th century, and that place is an accident black spot, which means many accidents happen in that place. So death pulls death towards it. And so I had the local vicar do a requiem mass for all those people, even though it happened in the 15th century. So death pulls death towards it. And all these things are like magnets. So traumas are caught in the field and acts as magnets for the current generation, who is the only people who are available, who are able to transform the situation.
Okay, this is good. This is so good. Okay, so the trauma gets caught in the field. One of the things that I'm trying to unwind is how or where in the field. Because we talked about that memory is not in the brain and there's no traces of memory. Is it in the land around us? Is it in the energetic fields that make up our body, which is what I think, and which is what I wonder if you think, that those traumas live in the biofield that surrounds us, as well as the physical tissues, and that as we shift those things shift for us. What is your take on where these things are? Like you talked about this town, is there a standing wave of energy in that town that then draws like to like?
So that's an impossible question, because fields have no location really, except that they are associated with the people with whom they have anything to do. But I don't think they're in the body. I don't think, if you look historically at fields in science, for example, they are known by their effects, not by what they are. So we don't know necessarily what a field is. So the family field, the ancestral field, the knowing field. We don't really know what these are. I mean, and we just know their effects.
Yeah.
So I don't think they're in the flesh and blood. So one thing that happens in this work is that the person who's working, say you were working, you would choose from naive representatives, so a group of people you might not know, people to represent your mother, father, brother, sister, etc., etc. And then, in the most mysterious way, they become those people. So, for example, my son Cosmo, this is the time I noticed this most extremely. So I had these two brothers who worked with me a lot. I mean, for many years. And one of them was doing his PhD at Cambridge in music. The other was working for, I don't know, some political organization, but he was the vulnerable one. And so the musician one chose my son Cosmo. He'd never done this work before. He'd never seen it happen. And I wasn't working with him because he's my son, but he was one of the naive representatives. So this person chose him to represent his brother, who was in the room, who was doing the work as well. And my son, who's very cheery, Cosmo, he stood there and then he slumped. And then I could see his brain working. This is ridiculous, I'm Cosmo. Slump. This is ridiculous, I'm Cosmo. Slump. So his rational mind kicked in and he became himself again. And then he was caught in the field. He was like being touched in the playground. You're it. He became the person being watched by that person, being watched by his brother. He became that person. And then he went back to his rational mind. No, I can't possibly be the case. I'm Cosmo. And so he went from one to the other, until he got it. And then he slumped. And then he remained the vulnerable brother. And so that's what it's like. And that's when, and it's completely baffling because you only have to say, you are my sister Joan, or you are my father John, and you become that person. And I don't know what we're tuning into. I mean, nobody knows what we're tuning into, but we're tuning somehow into the knowing field. And I think that we all have that ability to tune into everything, but we don't because the nitty-gritty of life gets in the way. All the kind of stuff of eating, shitting, making sure things happen as we would like them to do, and all the kind of nonsense that we live our life by interferes. So we never really tune into that knowing that we all have an ability to tune into. And this is what's exciting about this work, is because not only do you work with your family, but you also, when you're chosen to represent other people, you also learn, because people get better and better at it. You learn to let go and you learn to really become in the present. It's all about being in the present. You become in the present and you tune into this field of knowing that we all have. And it's miraculous.
It sounds miraculous. And I don't know what the fear of going into that, it's the so unknown of like how it all works. And also, to be fully honest, it's like, do you have to then go through those traumas in your family lineage? I mean, I've just discovered some quite gnarly family traumas. I'm like, oh, I don't want to, and even there I hold the points, and, the Donna shows you like to keep going into stress. So is it that it's like, okay, then hold on, we're going for it. Is it like that?
Well, the way I do it, I do have people, I have people address each person they've chosen briefly. So you're my mother Jane, you're my father John, da, 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 da. And I have them talk about the interruptions. So there's something about the work being about unfinished business. And so interruptions are what cause the trauma. And so I do like people just to summarize the interruptions, but they're not usually, you don't usually know the interruptions in your family, in your parents' life usually. Except, deaths, suicides, abortions, those kind of things. But that's fine, because those are what count. So I do have people refer to them. And so the other thing about this work is that in order for me to guide it, I have to be in the present, which is exactly where I want to be, because I can never have any idea, if this, then that, if this, then that. That doesn't work. it has to dance. I have to dance with novelty in the moment of its revelation, and that's exciting. That's thrilling, and usually it's fun. Actually, I mean, very often it's even funny. You know, the funniest things happen, and so there's nothing to be afraid of. You know, it's very benign, and it's about. I'm able to see the connections, and to have somebody do what's necessary to transform it.
So, I'm already putting the seed in that next time you're here, I'm going to come here and do. I'm vaguely setting that intention. As I said, I'm nervous for it, but then I feel like I've taken this workshop with Rupert and Merlin and Cosmo. This was my second time that I took it. I took it, I don't know, 7-9 years ago when there was 18 of us at Bluff House.
Oh, yes.
And so
lots changed since then.
A lot has changed since then.
Merlin's become they both become superstars.
They have, but still in primary, Rupert is the superstar, and so I love the way that the three of them and then the four of you have all managed that in such a graceful, beautiful, archetypal way. I think that the four of you, and you talked about this in the workshop, sort of representing, I mean, like literally Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Father, Son, Son, Holy Spirit, that came out of that workshop. So I wonder if you said that you hadn't really thought about that matriarch before, but that you do this work that is so archetypal, and you're in this family that is incredibly archetypal. I mean, each one of you individually and then together, it's sort of like, it's as awe-inspiring as it gets, at least for me, and I know for many, many people. And so is it possible for you to think of yourself both as part of this family that probably argues and, whatever, has all their stuff and loves each other and messy and all that? And then can you also see yourself, I mean, you named your children these two very archetypal names. It's not like you've got, Susie and Derek or something, So I have to think that that's sort of part of it all.
Absolutely. And I don't know how it happened. I mean, Rupert and I have always just done our work. I mean, I was doing my work long before I met Rupert. He was doing his work. And in a way, I was looking for somebody doing the work he was doing, because I was looking for a biologist who answered the whole question about how form comes into being, because that's what I was working with at the time. And he kind of materialized, and then I could let him kind of do the science part, and I could get on and do the, experiential part. And the boys were brought up at home. Rupert and I both went to boarding schools, which is what if you're sort of middle or upper middle class in England, you go to a boarding school, and we both went to boarding schools. But our boys, we had them quite late. I was 40 and 42, and so we didn't want them they went to private schools, but we went where we live in London. There are some excellent private schools nearby. They were able to walk to school, which meant they could look at the snails and the birds and the fruit on the trees, not the advertising hoardings, which is what when you drive you see.
Yeah.
And so they were brought up at home in this environment, seeing and being with both of us doing what we do. And so I think that just rubbed off on them. They were brought up in this resonant field. I can't say that we consciously, bred this into them. I think it was just, they had no choice because they were in the field, all the time. And so we were both doing what we do, and both Rupert and I have always been way ahead of our time in a way. What we're doing is it's sort of ahead of a time, and I think they've kind of grooved into it and run with it in their own way,
and keep expanding it. Yeah. And expanding it forward as well. And we don't work together. I mean, this is unusual. It's just that we've always come here. When Rupert and I first came, Merlin was 9 months old. And Cosmo wasn't thought of. And the next year he was in my belly, and the next year he was a baby. So we've been coming here so long. So they've sort of grown up in this magical place as well. Yeah. And with us doing what we're doing, and so they've never experienced somebody going out to work and working for somebody else, or they've just grown up with this in this field of exploration and expansion and trying to sort of express and explore beyond the known world, and to ask
to ask the right questions, really. It's all about asking the right questions.
Yes, it is.
I remember when I was at university and I did my thesis. I did 4 years at Fine Arts, and I remember I decided we had to do an art historical thesis in our third year. It was a 4-year course. And most people chose artists, and I thought, well, what's the point of reading and expressing somebody else's ideas or somebody else's ideas about somebody else's art? And so I decided to examine the spiral in art and nature. And so I remember going to the biology professor at the university and asking him about phyllotaxis, the way that geometrical spirals in all natural things, in the shape of horns and flowers and sunflowers and pineapples and shells and galaxies. And he said, oh, we don't ask those kind of questions. And the thing is that at that point, integrative understanding, cross-disciplinary studies didn't exist, but for me, it's always been about looking beyond the boundaries, asking questions in all. It's only it's all about asking the right questions of the universe.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Okay, I want to go deeper into the other work that you do, the sound, the chanting, the resonance, because I think it's all one thing. You think so too, yes. So back to the fields again. One of the things that we've learned in Ayurveda and in yoga, that chanting, the Brahmari chant specifically, which is that B when you it's kind of humming and you close, is that you're clearing the myelin sheath in the brain and actually clearing imprints off of it. And so that makes me think of healing trauma, and that is one of the things that Brahmari breath is used for. You chant from an equally as old tradition, and I have to wonder if that is part of the healing work as well, what the resonance does to the body. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I came to the work with families through, I started looking at spiral patterns, which I've mentioned, and the flows of water and how flow, when interrupted, turns around on itself and becomes form. So eddies which become independent from the form. And so that was my whole beginning, really, was how form is created. Then I saw the work of people like Hans Jenny, which is the work of Faraday waves, which started with Leonardo, watched it in the dust in his wood patterns when, vibrated. So it has a long history. So I saw the work of Hans Jenny, who was a Steinerian doctor, who showed how seamless, formless matter, liquids of different viscosities and powders and so on, took on the patterns of nature when vibrated. So I became very interested in the patterns in nature. And actually I had somebody in my workshop in the 80s who was a sound engineer who was so taken with that idea, he went away and built what he called a cymoscope, because Hans Jenny called these, cyma, which means wave in Greek. So he built a cymoscope, and sort of, 50 years later, Rupert and Merlin, maybe 60, I can't remember, bought one of these devices in order to look at the patterns. Mm-hmm. So it's come full circle. Wow. So anyway, I was very interested in patterns in nature, and then in sound, and how sound, all forms of resonance create form, and that was where one of my starting points. So then I realized that we'd gone silent as a humanity. That when I started, there were no community choirs. To join a choir, you had to read music, have an audition, sing in tune, and so forth. So it was a very, you had to be a bit of a professional musician, and there was no other way of singing together. And I realized that we had gone silent, that the urge to predict the future, people put on white coats and they figured out what happened yesterday in order to predict what happened tomorrow, to control the universe, to feel in control, because otherwise it was all too scary and too unpredictable. And so if we could predict what would happen tomorrow based on what happened yesterday, cool. So this is, and I did a research fellowship in the biophysics department with the man, one of the 3 who got the Nobel Prize for discovering the structure of DNA. So I was very embedded in that world. But I realized that we had to reclaim our voices, and that sound is unique in the sense that every form has its own sound, but sound dissolves the boundaries of the form that it creates. And so every sound is a key to its own dissolution. And so I realized then that it was absolutely key for us to reclaim our voices, because when you chant together with other people, you dissolve the boundaries between you and you create a community. And of course, we all need community, and that's something that's gone by the wayside. So singing together is a magical thing. And once I went to, a friend of mine was singing in a choir, and I remember going to this concert and sitting in this very cold, it was a huge, great church, and it was very cold, and the choir was all up there and they were singing away, and I was cold and bored and fed up. And at the end, they all came down from the podium and they were jolly and happy, and I was bored and cold. And I, it's just an example of what happens when you sing. Singing is exciting, and it does all kinds of things. And so, for example, you talked about clearing out the brain. So once I had in one of my workshops, I had a professor of, what was he? He was Parkinson. He said, "I'm a Parkinsonian." So he was a neurophysiologist, really, who specialized in Parkinson's disease. Anyway, it turned out, so he stood up at the very end of the workshop. He hadn't said a word. And he'd come with his wife. So he didn't even sort of come on his own volition. And he said, "This is so interesting, you're vibrating the brain." So I said, "Yes, we're vibrating the brain." Because to do this kind of chanting, you actually push the sound up into the cerebral cortex and the whole brain cavity. And I said, "Yes, we're vibrating the brain." And he said, "Well, that's what we do when we give ECT, electric shock treatment." So I said, "Well, I think this is a more benign way of vibrating the brain." But there's no question, anyway, that the brain needs vibrating. The brain likes to be vibrated. And this form of chanting pushes the sound up into the pineal and pituitary glands, which we no idea what they do really. But there are various things that we do now know. We know about the vagus nerve. It's all about the vagus nerve. So we know that chanting activates the vagus nerve. And the vagus, it's called a wanderer. It covers the whole body, and it affects us emotionally and psychologically and physically. And so vibrating the vagus nerve, good thing. And then the other thing is that it stimulates nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator, so it reduces blood pressure. So there are all kinds of things. And then, of course, it stimulates, all what are known as the happy chemicals, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, all these things that people externalize the means of transformation, put it in a pill or a mushroom or whatever, and then re-imbibe it. Where we have these things endogenously, we have them inside. We just have to activate them. And I think that's more exciting, really, than externalizing them and taking it, although that means that we have no control, of course, which is good. We have to give up control. Whereas if you activate them endogenously, we still have an element of control. But they're all there, and the sound activates them, and it does all kinds of things. And if you're chanting, you can only chant in the present. However, you can still chant in the present and think about what you forgot to do yesterday, the regrets of the past, and what you have to do tomorrow, the obligations for the future. So regrets and dreads. And that's what eats away into our experience of the present moment. So if you're chanting in the present and you're listening to yourself chanting in the present, you're using your own senses to be present with your presence. Then it's not possible as long as you remember to listen. And that's really the key. And if you do that, you can be in the present moment, and that's one of the most powerful things there is.
One of the things that I loved so much about this workshop was all of the singing that we did together.
Yeah.
And a few times I was like, "Okay, Cosmo, we're going to do this 6-part harmony with 80 people and no one knows how to sing, or some people do, but most of us are." And I just thought, "Oh, it's so complicated." And then it just happened, and it was magical.
Yeah.
It was magical. And it also gave me a glimpse of, like you said, Cosmo has sort of fallen you into the musical realm, and Merlin has followed Rupert into the intellectual realm. And then, of course, everyone crosses over because you all play instruments and you all are intellect. So it's like and artists are in every stripe. would you consider giving us just a tiny taste? I'm totally putting you on the spot. I didn't even ask if I could ask. So you can say no, we could edit this out.
That's
but
right.
Would you do a little bit of your chanting?
Yeah. So when I started and to bring people together to make sounds, I was very aware that the whole Western story, which Abraham is salvation history. We're all following Abraham. He abandons his family and he's going to the promised land. So the whole Western notion is one of going anywhere but where we are. It's all about discursivity. It's all about going from there to somewhere else, evolution, upwards and onwards, getting better. Everything is developing. This whole idea is such a Western idea.
Exhausting.
I know. And I mean, it's all about that. And whereas you don't get that in the East at all. It's about using sound to corral the mind into the present moment. So it's not about, so chanting mantra, for example, mantras often have no meaning. They are qualifications of enlightenment, for example, which are lumped together, and then they're repeated, and they're repeated, and they're in archaic languages, so it's not in a language that you're going to start thinking about, what am I saying, whatever. It's in an archaic, like, you know the intention. And you repeat it. So it corrals the mind into the present. So I realized that chanting words is problematic because, if you chant words, the example I often give is if you're chanting a national anthem, for example, it's fine if you're in the right country, but if you step over the border, it's the wrong song. So words not only take the mind from here to there and take you on a journey, like Western music, which has a dance has a time signature. It's a dance. It goes from here to there. So words have a beginning. Sentences in languages we understand have a beginning, middle, and end, and they go somewhere. They go somewhere else. And so I realized that words were a problem. And so I wanted a form of chanting which was also it didn't belong to any particular tradition, because every country has its own culture, its own tradition, and of course that's also problematic. So I wanted a form of chanting which had no words and which was non-cultural in a sense. So I came across this form of chanting. I have to say I found it in Central Asia, I found it first of all in Central Asia amongst Tibetans who I'd been studying with. Then I lived and worked with Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, a German composer, for 4 years in the early 70s. And he had written a piece called Stimmung. He created electronic music, through sine waves. He created music out of sine waves, which is about as basic and fundamental as you can get. And he had written a piece called Stimmung for 6 singers, singing a very simple form of vocal harmonics. And I had come across a form of chanting amongst Tibetans, which was a much more sophisticated form of harmonic chanting. So when I came to inducting and encouraging groups of people to come together to make sound, I wanted something which was non-cultural, non-verbal, but completely fundamental to the nature of sound, and even more important, in tune. So one of the things that happened to Western music, and I'm coming to your answer in a minute, one of the things that happened to Western music was with the popularity of keyboard instruments, which came with the piano and all the sort of pre-pianos, clavichords and so forth and so on. So was fixed tuning. And so traditionally people had tuned from one note to a note 5 notes above it. 5 notes above that, 5 notes above that, 5 notes. And that was called the cycle of fifths. And so the fifth is, apart from the octave, the most consonant interval. And so, but what happened was, when you get to what should be the octave, you overlap it by a quarter of a semitone, which is known as the Pythagorean comma. And so it's a spiral, which is interesting. It's naturally a spiral. But this doesn't work for instruments which have fixed tuning. And so
they had to think of another way of tuning. And people like Bach and Galileo and all the kind of polymaths, mathematicians, instrument builders, racked their brains to find a way of retuning music so this wasn't a problem, where you could play in different keys and so on. So what they did was they took this little overlap, put it back into the octave, or put it into the octave, making all the intervals in the octave slightly stretched or slightly squashed. In other words, out of tune. So the Pact of the Devil will make all our music out of tune, and now look what we can do with it. So all music since the invention of keyboards, since Bach's time basically, has been out of tune, but not so out of tune that people would notice. But nevertheless, you can't be sound in mind and body if you're singing very slightly out of tune. So again, I was looking for not only something non-verbal, something non-cultural, but I wanted a form of chanting which would be in tune and which wouldn't be melodic and therefore take you somewhere else. So what I came across was this form of chanting.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. Every bit of it. Yes.
On a single note, which everybody could do. And so when people be told you can't sing in tune, it means you can't sing two notes. You can't get the relationship right. So if it's only on one note, most people can sing on one note. So, it's very hard to say you can't sing in tune because most people can sing. So singing on one note, but by changing the shape of the resonant cavities that we all have, which we do every time we speak anyway, we're able to articulate the internal structure of the sound, the components of the sound, which people don't know exist. So they become louder than the note you're chanting, and then you hear all these other sounds which can only be in tune. So that's what I did. So I'll give you an example. One note. But I don't know, can you hear the other notes inside? Okay. So those are the harmonics, and they can only be in tune. So you're able to be sound in mind and body.
Wow.
In tune.
Wow.
And that's wonderful because everybody can do it. You do have to learn how to do it. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't rely on any intrinsic musical ability. Except, some musicians can usually hear what's going on more quickly because they're trained. Mm-hmm. But basically everyone can do it.
Do you do this chanting with your family groups as well?
Oh yeah.
You do?
Well, no, not this kind. Funnily enough, actually, I think it's very important to do things ceremonially and with chant. So I do use chant in the family group, but not this particular kind. I do this when I'm doing the voice work, along with lots of other ways of being present. But with the family constellation work, I definitely chant, and I work with each person rather shamanically for a moment, because again, I think it's really important to tune into resonance and to take people beyond their normal rational mind. So I use all kinds of holy waters and sages and rattles and feathers and what, just briefly. And I have everybody tuning and in together, between each person, because I think it's really important to take it into some other realm. So you're taking people out of their normal rational mind right at the beginning.
And what would you call that realm? I'm leading you a little bit, but what do you, the realm when the rattles and the chanting, and so it's not the everyday experience. What do you call that? What is that for you?
Oh, I mean, I'm not sure that names are very helpful really, because they're just names. Mm-hmm. We don't know what happens when people go into trance. We don't know what happens when people meditate. We don't know what happens when people are hypnotized. We don't know. We have no idea what's going on really. We just give them names, and they don't really mean anything. But these are all ways of taking people beyond the rational discursive mind, this going from here to there, the thinking. So you enter into the nature of mind rather than getting obsessed with the contents of the mind. And so I think anything which does that, but what name we give it, I'm not sure it means anything. I don't think we really know what any of those names mean. They just, hypnotism. I mean, people do all kind of weird things when they're so-called hypnotized, but what does it mean? I don't know what it means.
But it's giving you access to a place that you've seen dramatic
changes. It allows people to go beyond the discursive mind into some other world which is more real. So the Tibetans have this idea of I see you as separate from me, and that gives rise to me wanting you or not wanting you, pushing you away or pulling you to me. One is attachment, one is aversion, based on ignoring what is, which is there is no separation. And we know that, but in this world we have to act as if there is, because it's the world of duality. So we have to function in duality somehow or other. But we know better. We know there isn't any separation.
This is so great. I just a couple more questions. I really wanted to ask you about the Pythagorean comma, and then I was like, don't ask her about because it's such a complicated question, and I'm not sure how many of our listeners will be as thrilled to hear about it as I am, but I love it. Now this is now the second or third time I'm starting to, I think now I grok it. Like that was the clearest. I'm like, okay, now I know what she's talking about. You mentioned something about that we all have within every resonant thing, being us, has within us the note that destroy isn't the right word, but what was it that you said? Because what I came to mind was like shattering the glass.
Yeah.
Is that, and what do you mean by each of us has that with us?
Well, I think sound is so fundamental because everything has its own sound. However, when you start to talk about organs, they're very complicated. So the simpler something is, the simpler the sound. So, for example, once when I was working with Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, we did a piece based on my whole understanding of the effect of sound on matter. So we did a piece. It was commissioned by the city of Liège, and this was, when was it? In the early 70s. We did it 2 or 3 times, I think. And so there were 13. So it was in a half-built television studio, which meant there were all these different rooms, but they were sound transparent because they hadn't put the glass in it. And so the public walked around from situation to situation, and then there were all these musicians in these different arenas doing different things. And one of the musicians, Hugh Davis, who'd been Stockhausen's assistant many years before, he had got a siren, this is the early 70s. So it was an electronic device with a knob. I don't know if you remember knobs, but they died out. It's all push buttons nowadays.
Yeah. Anyway, I was thinking it could be UK, US, but
yeah. Rest in peace, knobs. I miss knobs. Anyway, so you turn it and it would go. So you could change the pitch by turning the knob. And he got all these pieces of glass and with holes in them. And he'd put on a sheet of glass and he'd buckle it in with a screw onto this siren, and then he got a glass of water and he'd pour film of water on the glass, and then he'd turn the knobs, and then when he got into a harmonic of the fundamental note of the glass, these patterns would appear on the glass in the water. Meanwhile, the public were all gathering because it was so exciting. And then he'd get it, and then he'd do what he called worrying it, which he goes slightly above and slightly below the note of the glass. The glass would break, and people would go away. But it was, the tension would build and build and build. But that was a very simple piece of glass, just a sheet of glass. So everything has its own note, and that note is the key which destroys it. But you need it in the case of glasses. You have to have very high quality glasses, nobody's going to do it without our best glasses. And you have to have a very accurate voice, to worry it, to go slightly above it and then it shatters. So everything has its own sound, and that is the key. That sound is what will dissolve the form. So it's this mysterious thing that the sound of a thing is the key to its own dissolution.
So we have a note, each of us has our own
Well,
note?
again, that's very complicated. People say, organs have it, but I, for me, it's much more important to be present and work with sound that way. But in a sense, we do have our own note. And, but when you're singing in a group, you can't have an individual note. You have to find the group note. But you can find your own note on your own, but you have to be on the own, and you have to work with sound a lot, and you have to be nowhere near radiators which make noises or planes which go overhead with radio. So you have to repeat and start chanting, for days on end, and then finally your voice will come somewhere to rest. And it's related to your speaking voice. We all have a different speaking voice, we all have a different pitch. But when you're doing this kind of chanting, what you want something which is low enough so the whole of you is vibrating, but high enough so you have a certain tension. But too much tension and it's exhausting, no tension and you can't do anything. So and that the main difference, of course, is between men and women, because men have long, the thing that happens at adolescence is that the thing gets longer, and so the voice sinks down, which is a trauma for young boys.
Yep.
So we all do have our own sound, but and in Indian music, people try and find it. In Western music, people just try and get you to sing as high as you can or as low, and find whether you're soprano or an alto or a bass or whatever.
And so do you think your note has the ability to heal you or dissolve you or both, and that's maybe not so different?
Well, for me, it's more important to use sound to be in the present moment than to find a sound which dissolves you. And because we're so little in the present moment. And so making a sound in such a way that you can be in the present and not thinking about what might afraid of what might happen in the future. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but we're afraid of what might happen in the future, or we're regretting what we forgot to do. And so this erodes our experience of the present moment. And in the present, all is available, all knowledge, all healing, everything is available. And it's a happy place, it's a blissful place. And we're so little there. So sound is quite unique in the sense that, sound is unique in another way, because sound is based on counting. So if I go like that, I interrupt the continuity of your experience. If I speed it up, we have a rhythm. If I speed up beyond 16 cycles per second, that rhythm becomes a pitch. Then the highest pitch is the harmonics. And then you have duration, which is how long a piece of music will last. So, maybe 20 minutes, or in the case of Stockhausen or Wagner, it might be several days. But so the whole of music based on counting. And yet what happens when you count is this ineffable qualitative experience of the magic of sound. So sound uniquely brings together the quantitative universe and the qualitative universe, and nothing else does that, because it is both, and that's a huge aspect of sound itself.
Have you ever played around with a theremin?
I haven't.
You haven't?
No, it's strange. Mysterious. No, I don't know how they work.
It is about your electromagnetic field interfering with the electromagnetic field that this reverse antenna is putting out. So it's like whoever theremin, the antenna from a radio, instead of it's broadcasting out instead of receiving in, and then your interference pattern is coming into it. That's a very not technical way of talking about it, but I think you would love playing around with one. I know someone who has one, so maybe sometime I'll connect you.
Although I always feel that instruments, whatever the kind they are, I mean, that's the most mysterious one, of course, but I always think they're displacement activities, and what's really important is the human voice, because we are an instrument, you know, we're a tube with holes in us, and you know, we kind of have forgotten, or vocal music's been hijacked by the professionals, you know, musical literacy, which means unless you can read music, you know, you're an amateur, which means to love something, and the professional often doesn't. And so I think what's the most important is using our voices, actually. And very often, you know, I'll have professional musicians who never dared sing, and for them that's the most traumatic, because they secretly know that the voice is the key. So while I love to play with your theremin, I think, you know, the voice is even more magical.
Do you play instruments at home, or just, no, I don't mean just sing, or sing, that's your instrument?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. My mother was a concert pianist, and her brother was a composer and an organist, and her father played the organ, and we have 6. I was brought up in a house with 3 concert grands, and now between the 4 of us we have 6 pianos. And so and because Rupert, you know, his uncle played the organ, his grandfather played the organ, so you know, music's in our family. And I started playing partly because my mother was a concert pianist, I went to boarding school. I refused to be taught by her. And so, you know, I rather sort of rejected it because it was so in the family. But I started to play the flute for a while. I played the flute for a while, and but an interesting thing, when I was quite small, my godfather had a piano house in the local town, and he became my godfather because he was a great friend of my mother, because my mother started the music at the local university, Kiel University. And so as a child, as a young child, she didn't know what to do with me, really. She wasn't very maternal. So she'd take me along to, while she visited Bernard, he was called, this piano house full of disembodied actions and people. And in those days, you know, this is in the 50s. So in those days, England was very English. You know, there weren't all these people from exotic countries like now, but there were a lot of Polish people who'd been left over from the war, and they were all somehow able to French polish and tune pianos. They were very sophisticated, really. So I would be left wandering around as a little child, and my mother would hold up with Bernard, and I don't know what they were up to, but anyway, they were. And I was wandering around all these disembodied pianos and keyboards and actions, and while they were being tuned out of tune. They were all being tuned out of tune. So I think that affected me, really. So when it came to reclaiming music, because I had, and thank God, you know, thank God in a way I did reject all the kind of classical music, not the classical music, but the instrumentation, which actually, if you play an instrument, you execute something. Interesting use of words.
It is interesting use of words. Yes.
So in a way, I rejected, you know, my all this sort of ordinary music tradition in order to take on and reclaim it in another way. And I think if I had followed on as a classical musician, which so easily could have been my path, I don't think I would be doing what I'm doing.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that you were around all those disemboweled pianos. This has just been so wonderful. I feel so very in the present moment. We are surrounded by this exquisite beauty and this exquisite island. You are such a generous communicator. I love everything that you've been sharing. And not to take us out of the present moment, but I'm curious what you are excited about, things that you might be working on or projects that you're excited about that you might want to share.
Well, before COVID, I was doing very extraordinary extended ceremonies based on the mandala. So the mandala is a diagram of a rotatory process, originally around a stupa, going through the 4 directions. It's a very complex diagram with multiple layers of meaning based on the understanding of the development of consciousness and the idea of afflictive emotions, these these different afflictive emotions, which when transformed become wisdoms. So either you get them as diagrams, as paintings, or as stupas, or you might find a kind of monastery where a monk would have spent his whole life building a kind of palace with a deity in the center, who's a manifestation of enlightenment in a particular way. And so what I did was I had large groups of people embody the mandala and go through, progress every half hour. We do a ceremony. We do it would be continuous chanting for like 10 days, and we do this half-hour sequence of the whole process of chanting, and then we'd move on, and I'd have a soul guide who would take people on, and you'd end up where you started. It's a very complex diagram, manifestation, a Western interpretation of a very profound psychological understanding of the nature of mind. But we did it as experiential. We'd all wear the colors of the directions. It was absolutely a mind-blowing experience, ceremonial manifestation of our minds, really. But because of COVID, the work was very intimate. So you were breathing and chanting in each other's faces at various points. So I realized it was completely inappropriate for COVID. So since COVID period, with this transmission of the virus, I started working online, which actually I never thought was possible. I was taught how to use Zoom by an 18-year-old, which was through very peculiar circumstances, and I've adapted it so that I can do the family constellations online, brilliantly. Wow. I can do the voice workshops online. I do one every month. I do a voice workshop one month. I do a family constellation next month. I've been doing that since the pandemic, and now I've started doing week intensives face to face. I used to do residential work, but I can't face the complications of, all the parameters of when people arrive, what they want, when they're leaving, do they want a bath or a share or that. So now I do these 2 week intensives in London of the family constellations, which is not quite so intimate, and people can take care of their own lodging. So that I'm very excited about. I love doing the work. I mean, I love both the sound work and the family constellations, and I just did a 5-day workshop here where I worked with everybody. When I'm working face to face, I work with everybody, and so in a way, what I love most is manifesting, my ability, which is to see what needs to be focused on and recognized and connected in people's lives, so that their lives are changed, and also transmitting the voice as a practice. So these are what I've been doing for many years, and I still love doing them. So onwards with the work.
I love that. You're still so passionate about it. And I just wonder, is that something that you take over to your not working life, that ability to sort of see what people need? That's a very maternal thing just in general, to see what people need or where connections could be made. Do you think that's something you do?
Well, now Merlin and Cosmo have moved out of our house. They've bought their own. They both got old Methodist chapels in South Gloucestershire, which is about 2.5 hours drive from where we are. And they've both got these amazing old chapels. So in a sense, I'm not any longer in the family situation, and so I'm just learning to experience a totally different lifestyle with Rupert. Rupert and I have been together over 40 years. And so in a sense, and we're just overcoming the pandemic, so getting back together again. So it's all very new in a way. Yeah.
Does that feel exciting and expansive?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to get back to realizing the joys of community.
Yes.
Yeah, and coming here, it's wonderful too, because all these people that I've known for so long, it's wonderful to connect with them again.
It's true, and I'm so grateful to connect with you. I was saying I bumped into Merlin on the co-op on the way over here to visit you, and being here on the island, it's so beautiful and casual and interconnected, and everyone feels like little mushrooms, and we're all underground, and then we sprout out at different events. And I was saying that I was nervous to come here because you and Rupert, and I was like, I can't do the research, because when I do the research, then I see how it is amazing to me how you are all in your own fields giants, and yet you are humble isn't even the right word. That doesn't express it. There is some kind of genuineness, graciousness, heart-centeredness that allows just a very human connection to happen. And so I'm very grateful for that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. For me too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Alrighty, Energy fans, that's a wrap on another positively charged episode of Energy Works. Lauren, this is the part where we get to use our energy puns.
It's been electrifying, hasn't it, Blaine? We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have.
If you're feeling amped up and you want to keep your energy flowing, be sure to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform.
And we'd love to hear from you, so please take a moment to leave us a review. Your feedback helps us continue to deliver content that resonates, so light up our inbox.
And spark a conversation with your friends to tell them about us. And we'll see you next time on Energy Works.